In tonight's Dateline Defense, more on the intelligence leak scandal. Is anyone paying attention to this except Congress? Plus, is Russia sicking their attack helicopters on Syrian freedom fighters? And what happens to our local defense industry if across-the-board budget cuts take place? Joining me tonight for analysis is retired Air Force Colonel Cedric Leighton. He's a former military intelligence officer and president of Cedric Leighton Associates. So what kind of secrets are being leaked, and are they any more than the normal assumptions we make about military operations?
Well, these go beyond normal military operations, Boris. In particular, the leak that the United States and Israel were responsible for the Stuxnet virus. That goes into sources, methods, and applications. It really has the operational aspect of the intelligence piece in line, and that's what's different about this. Sometimes intelligence operations are leaked, but they're usually of a much more conventional nature than the cyber world. And in this case, when you're dealing with Stuxnet, you're obviously touching the cyber world, which is one of the provinces of the deepest secrets that the U.S. government has.
Stuxnet is that great little virus that can control rheostats, thermostats, and operational gear in a nuclear facility a la Iran and target a specific piece of control equipment to throw the centrifuges out of whack. And it's miraculous how it works. Is the fact that the U.S. is linked with Israel, because our enemies love to link us with Israel on everything, because then their enemy becomes everybody else's enemy if the U.S. is tied to Israel. What proof does anybody have that we're behind Stuxnet, if not Israel?
Well, basically what it boils down to is, in this case, it was an assertion in the book by David Sanger from the New York Times that talked about, the very specific relationship between the Israelis and the U.S. But in this particular case, what we're dealing with is a situation where the way in which we do this, there's always been rumored that Stuxnet and similar viruses like Dooku and others were a piece of the U.S. cyber arsenal, and also the Israeli cyber arsenal, but there's never been any real assertion and real nodding that this actually has taken place. So this is the first time that that's been revealed and that nobody has strongly denied it.
Let's talk now about the kill list, the Predator drones that are out there, crossing people off the list almost every day. Maybe leaking the kill list is a good thing. Maybe it keeps our enemies looking over their shoulder all the time, as they should be. But what's the latest with that?
Well, the basic idea is that, in this case, the assertion has been made that the president has a list that he goes down, and he is, in essence, figuring out which people, personally figuring
Making a list, checking it twice, finding out who's naughty and nice. I mean, I hate to say that, but that's basically what it is. Plus, there's been argument whether the military controls that kill list or the White House. Separate from that, what about the leaks? Is it a good thing or not?
Well, I would say that the president is ultimately in control because he is the commander-in-chief, and so he is the one who is making the decisions whether or not to go after these individuals.
But this goes back to LBJ in Vietnam, where the White House was micromanaging the Vietnam War when the general should have been doing that. Is it any different now with the kill list?
In some ways, it's not different, because it does show a degree of micromanagement. But what it is also is it's a reflection of what is happening in the war on terror, where there's very selected targets, and those very selected targets become very, very minute and very precise in nature. This is not a war that goes in where there's an annihilation of villages or annihilation.
We don't have tanks and armies marching across borders.
Nothing like that. It's a very unconventional war, and because of that, that then forces the decision-making process into some very, very specific tunnels, and these specific tunnels end up with things like the kill list. There is a list that the Bush administration had as well, so it's not dissimilar from that. The basic idea, though, is that these are very precise operations. That now there's information that, of course, the president is personally involved in these areas.
Well, now the critics are saying too, Cedric, that the White House is doing this to make the president look good. That it's one of the few things he can brag about from the past 4 years. Do you buy that assumption?
Well, it certainly does make the president look good. I mean, there is no question about it that the fact that he is personally engaged speaks to the narrative that President Obama has had all the way back to his campaign in 2008. What is different about it is that it also shows the inner workings of the U.S. government to a level that has not been really revealed to the public in recent years. There have been books like by Bob Woodward that talked about the Bush White House, but in this particular case, you're talking about ongoing operations, and that's the main difference. These ongoing operations are ones that really, if revealed, and obviously parts of them seem to have been, then it becomes a real problem to implement those operations and to continue with those operations in the future.
I'm sure Vladimir Putin and others around the globe are watching with interest of what's going on here, and that brings us to Russia's involvement in Syria and the attack helicopters that they apparently want to unleash on the freedom fighters, if you call them that, in Syria. What's Russia up to?
Well, what Russia is doing is they're honoring their agreements that they've had with Syria for a very long time, and those agreements go all the way back to the Cold War, when President Assad's father was one of the largest patrons of the Soviet Union in the Middle East. And in this particular case, what you're seeing is the Russians are modifying some of their helicopters, some of the Syrian helicopters, and they're re-exporting them to Syria in a way that will allow them, in spite of denials from the Soviet Foreign Ministry, will allow them to actually attack civilians or anybody else that they want to attack in the course of what appears to be a civil war.
Is there any positive outcome from any of this in Syria? Is it the lesser of evils with whoever wins that civil war? What's going to happen there, and where should the U.S. be?
Well, the U.S., in my estimation, should be actively supporting elements of the rebel forces, the Free Syrian Army. Now, having said that, you have to look at exactly who composes the Free Syrian Army, and we don't know that precisely at this point in time. But we need to be working with other nations in the Middle East, such as Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates. We also need to be working with Turkey in order to achieve a solution for Syria, because the bloodshed that we have right now is just simply unacceptable from a humanitarian standpoint.
Before we leave, let's talk about the budget. The Pentagon, a lot of defense contractors in this area, sequestration, which is coming up. Explain sequestration again, and where do we stand with the budget in terms of defense?
Well, basically, sequestration, Morris, is the idea that in a mandatory way, since there were no agreements reached within Congress and between Congress and the executive branch, there will be mandatory cuts of $500 billion on top of an already $497 billion cut that the Defense Department agreed to earlier this year. So you're doubling that. That is coupled with a similar amount on the entitlement side that's being cut. And what that will do to the defense industry, there are some estimates that mean that lead us to believe that there will be over 1 million jobs lost because of sequestration. And sequestration means this absolute cut in the defense budget where there will be no basis of appeal unless they reach an agreement before the end of the session of Congress.
And have you seen defense contractors already tightening their belts for the past 6 months so that those jobs have already been lost because they're anticipating the worst?
Some of those jobs have been lost. I think not all, because right now there's still some contracts in the pipeline that are going through the normal process, and some contracts are still being let. There are other contracts. For example, there is one on the MRAP that Mantech Corporation was able to get recently. There are other contracts that are being held in abeyance that will allow for a different way of doing business, but they will also cause some problems within the labor sector. And because of that, some of the jobs have been let, like Booz Allen Hamilton let go some people in January. Right. But that's going to happen even with more frequency as the next few months go on, and that's going to be an unfortunate factor.
Defense and military analyst Cedric Leighton, our guest on Capital Insider. We can follow you at Twitter at what?
At Cedric Leighton.
All right. Thank you, Cedric. See you next time.
You bet, Morris. Thanks so much.